Thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. Artillery was a touchy subject in the late medieval and early modern period. For example, captured enemy master gunners were frequently made a human cannonball. Friendly artillerymen, in contrast, were usually appreciated for their destructive capabilities, but not trusted completely. Their craft of killing and destroying at a distance was incomprehensible to most other soldiers and considered by many to be a dark art. So, without further ado, let's look at what this dark art looked like in practice and what the position of artillery was within early modern armies. According to the historian Siegfried Fiedler, artillery had a unique position in the armies of Europe until the 17th century. Within the army organization, it was a small, detached unit and usually had its own jurisdiction. Generally speaking, a medieval or early modern army did not have many cannons, nor many artillerymen. According to Georg Ortenburg, an expert on warfare in the age of the Landsknechts, only about 3 guns per 1,000 men were brought to the battle at the beginning of the 16th century, and even fewer toward the end of the century. Per gun, there were 1 or 2 specialists who commanded a team of assistants, mostly consisting of bell founders, blacksmiths, powder makers, carpenters, and other craftsmen. These specialists were so-called master gunners. The historian Gerhard Quas explains that they were usually craftsmen who specialized in the construction and operation of guns. A famous example is the engineer Orban, who made some of the large cannons used by the Ottomans at the siege of Constantinople in 1453. He was reportedly killed with a part of his crew when one of the bombards exploded. In the 16th century, the master gunners gradually split into specialists, focusing on the manufacture of cannons on one hand, and specialists operating and maintaining the guns on the other hand. The second group, the operators, kept the name master gunners. The master gunners were a small group, organized similarly to guilds and passing their knowledge only from father to son or by means of manuscript within their guild. Printed works of the art of artillery warfare became only widespread at the beginning of the 17th century. They kept their secrets well hidden, and their specialist services, consequently, remained in high demand for a long time. While some of the master gunners were permanently employed by a prince or a city, most of them were recruited whenever needed, just like most other soldiers. Gunsmiths were commanded and selected by the supreme commander of an army's artillery. They had to pass entrance exams, present certificates, and sometimes even demonstrate their skills in target practice. Those who met the requirements were then divided into 3 groups. The best operated the mortars, the second best the heavy guns, and all the others the light guns. The pay was also based on this classification. Because the artillery had to work hand in hand with them, sappers, miners, and bridge builders were also under the command of the supreme commander of the artillery. Princes and cities were eager to provide good conditions for these specialists so that they would stay with them as long as possible. After all, no one wanted to see a capable gunner join the enemy's ranks. Therefore, members of the artillery had certain privileges. If a battle for a city ended in success, they received 3 or 4 times the pay, all captured ammunition, and if they were in enemy territory, also the bells of the surrounding churches, which they could use as raw material to cast additional guns. They were also given preference in the distribution or purchase of food and were allowed to bring along their families to the camp. A nice example for their special legal position is the artillery, the artillery of the Landsknechts. The members of this group were not subject to the jurisdiction of the provost, as all the other Landsknechts, but only to the commander of the artillery, the so-called Feldzeugmeister. Some Landsknechts tried to abuse this special status. If a Landsknecht was accused of an offense, he might dart to the next artillery gun, touch it, and claim to be, by law, an artilleryman. If he managed to touch it before he was captured, he could only be judged by the artillery captain. In such a case, he could only be arrested if he moved more than 24 paces away from the gun or was not recognized by the other artillerymen within 72 hours. If the provost ignored this law, the Feldzeugmeister had the right to break camp and leave the army, with his men and the complete artillery train. Despite, or perhaps because of their special status, artillerymen were not particularly popular in the army camps of the late 15th and 16th centuries. In addition, it was considered unchristian, unchivalrous, and unfair to kill people, devastate livestock, and destroy buildings at long range. The common soldiers suspected dark art, sorcery, and the devil's work in the mysterious ways of artillerymen, an uncanny and unjustified advantage of cowards over brave soldiers. Siegfried Fiedler mentions that master gunners were often treated accordingly when they fell into the hands of the enemy, and Hans Delbrück, the source of what we said in the introduction, and one of the great historians of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, wrote, quote, "It is not infrequently reported that captured master gunners were put into their own big gun, which was then fired." End quote. Considering the basic means and difficult circumstances under which the master gunners were handling their guns, it is understandable why their work seemed like magic to contemporaries. Operating and especially gun laying, that is, aiming with an early modern gun, was truly a form of art. The aiming devices were very basic, the cannons inaccurate, and the projectiles anything but uniform. In addition, the cannons had to be repositioned and realigned after each shot. According to the Dutch historian Olaf van Nimwegen, a heavy gun, such as a 24-pounder, could roll back 5 to 6 meters after each shot due to the recoil. The master gunner and his assistants then had to use lifting beams and levers to bring the gun back into position and realign it. Even though master gunners and military scientists developed increasingly sophisticated tools to align the cannons as precisely as possible, it took a long time before reliable aiming was possible. A major milestone on the road to accurate shooting was the 1537 publication by the Italian mathematician and engineer Niccolò Tartaglia, who was dubbed the father of ballistics. Tartaglia recognized that a cannonball's maximum range was reached when fired at an angle of 45 degrees, and that the ideal amount of powder was met when the entire length of the barrel is used for its combustion. The knowledge of ballistics, however, was slow to catch on, and even 100 years later, some textbooks were still conveying completely outdated views. Yet, in the hands of good gunners, artillery could be the greatest asset of an army. It could inflict heavy casualties from a distance, devastate the morale of enemy troops, break the front of an enemy formation, and thus prepare the attack of the infantry or cavalry. Accordingly, the artillery usually opened the battle. If those under fire wanted to prevent heavy losses, they were forced to abandon their position and either attack or retreat, possibly giving up their advantage. An example of this is the Battle of Formini in 1450, in which the French bombarded the formation of the enemy English longbowmen, which forced them to attack. The English managed to capture the 2 French cannons, but they had to leave their strong fortified position and fell into disorder. This gave the 1,200 Breton knights who reached the battlefield at that very moment the chance to ride them down from the flank. Formini is also an example of a serious problem of artillery in the late medieval and early modern period. The guns, especially the big ones, were extremely heavy and cumbersome, so that they often fell into enemy hands, who could use them against those who had brought them to the battlefield in the first place. This is why the use of heavy guns in field battles decreased over the course of the 16th century. Maurice of Nassau, for example, used only 8 cannons in the Battle of Newport in 1600, in which he fought the Spanish in the dunes of Flanders with nearly 12,000 men. During this period, heavy artillery was increasingly used in siege warfare. For those who want to know more about the use of artillery in siege warfare, we recommend our tutorial on conquering early modern fortresses. It is linked in the upper right corner. The correct positioning of artillery was seen as a high art of warfare. Ideally, the guns could shoot at the enemy's main point of attack from a safe position. The larger guns formed the so-called static position artillery. If possible, they were placed on the flanks or on a hill, so that they were fairly well protected and had the advantage of an elevated position. If no such advantageous position was available, the guns were set up in front of the army and secured with field fortifications such as chevaux de frise, trenches, and palisades as best as possible. The light guns were combined with the big guns, placed in separate smaller groups near the pike squares or the infantry, or integrated into the defenses of the camp. The groups in which the artillery was placed were called batteries. A battery consisted of 2 to 30 guns of different sizes. Each battery was normally assigned an artillery colonel who commanded the gunners of his position. Size, composition, and position of batteries varied wildly. and it was only very late that the tactical guidelines and theoretical works on how to deploy artillery became widely available. In general, as Georg Ortenburg writes, it was barely possible to speak of tactical formations or deployment of artillery until well into the 16th century. However, the various types of guns were already divided into three groups according to their intended use: field gun, breaching gun, and mortars, with field guns usually making up about half of all artillery in an army. There were different modes of firing, such as the shot at point-blank range, in which the barrel was in a horizontal position and directly aimed at the target. Then there was the shot aimed along some sort of sight or the elevated barrel to shoot in an arch, or the ricochet shot, in which the bullet was fired at a flat angle in order to have it bounce after the impact and rip a gouge of death into the enemy formation. The firing mode considered most difficult was the so-called plunging fire, in which the projectile was fired at an angle of more than 45 degrees, for example from a mortar. Reinhard zu Solms, a German army commander, military engineer and military theorist in the 16th century wrote, quote, "A master gunner may be master of his gun, but never has a man finished training at the mortar." End quote. Depending on the firing mode and the target, different bullets were used. By far the most important was the solid round shot, simply called balls. They were mostly made of stone until the late 15th century, when artillerists increasingly relied on projectiles of lead or iron. In addition to these simple balls, however, there was also a wide range of other projectiles. When the target was an entire enemy formation, hail shot or canister shot were used quite frequently. These were, simply put, shotgun rounds for artillery, and came in a variety of designs, the best known being the so-called grape shot, in which a simple cartridge was filled with a few larger, systematically arranged balls. Much rarer were so-called fireballs. This is an umbrella term that refers to everything that burns or explodes. Fireballs included, for example, red-hot iron balls, which were used mainly against ships or flammable buildings. Basket-shaped balls filled with combustible material, and from the 16th century onwards, hollow balls filled with powder that exploded after impact. These projectiles usually had a separate fuse that was ignited either with the charge of the gun or before loading, and then burned off in flight. The last, noteworthy type of bullet were chain bullets. These usually consisted of a bullet cut in half but connected by a chain. After firing, this projectile flew in a very unstable fashion and then tore a large hole in its target. That's why they were popular for destroying the rigging of sails or ships. All in all, the master gunners and military minds of the time were very inventive, not only when it came to finding the most effective projectiles, but also in expediting tactical and technological progress. In the late 16th and 17th century, artillery gradually lost its guild-like character. The master gunners lost their special role. At the same time, guns were becoming more uniform, reliable and efficient, while ballistics and artillery tactics had been making rapid progress. The first to rely on large numbers of lighter regimental guns in battle, operated by specially trained soldiers, was the Swedish king Gustavus Adolphus. After the 30 Years' War, many other European armies followed his example and increasingly relied on artillery in field battles. This put an end to the special position of artillery. It gradually became a regular army compartment with standardized tactical maneuvers and eventually became the equal third army branch besides infantry and cavalry. Do you want to build a professional website dedicated to all things early modern history just like us? Well, let me introduce you to Squarespace, the sponsor of this video. We just started using Squarespace ourselves, and here's what we liked about the tool so far. Well, we did not think that building a website would be this easy and intuitive. With Squarespace's professional designs, you can customize the layout, look and feel of your website in a very easy way without any prior knowledge. In addition, Squarespace's traffic overview feature tracks trends and page visits as well as views to better optimize content. Also, Squarespace's email campaign tools enable us to create engaging emails that match our normal design. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready, go to squarespace.com/SandRhoman to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.